Okay, so I said that I would do a Klee guide if I hit a certain amount of subs, so here it is. I'm gonna quickly go over her skills as well as their additional info. Then I'm going to cover her optimal builds and lastly her combos that I personally use, which got me through Spiral Abyss 12. So starting off with her abilities, for her normal attacks, it's just a 3-hit combo that does decent damage, and the angle of her auto attacks are adjusted based on the distance between the enemies, but still they don't hit far. And as for her charge attacks, it shoots a laser beam diagonally downwards, so if you're on higher ground then the distance will change. Her elemental skill throws out a bomb that explodes and forms these mini bombs, and once an enemy touches their hitbox, they will explode. So for the initial bomb that's thrown, even though it looks pretty small, it can actually hit enemies in the air, and it also has a huge AoE. So there's only 3 additional things to note about her skill, and the first thing is that those little bombs work as an object for pressure plates that you see in the open world, but it is pretty troublesome to get them into place. Secondly, you can use Anemo characters to bring all the little mines closer, effectively doing a burst of damage, and this combo is pretty good if you're running Anemo characters, but note that Venti's burst doesn't pull her mini bombs, which is actually just weird because it's able to pull your loot, but not her bombs. And third, using her elemental skill for a second time while the mini bombs are still out will cause the existing set of mini bombs to explode prematurely, which isn't a bad thing, especially on enemies with large hitboxes. Moving on to her burst, it has a 10 seconds duration with a 15 seconds cooldown, and how it works is that it shoots 4 lasers on nearby enemies, and each laser hits in a small AoE as well, which is why you can get a lot of hits if your enemies are stacked together. This has an interval of 2 seconds, so basically it just means 20 lasers in that 10 seconds. Also, because it hits in a small radius, if we theoretically think of a situation where the enemies are all clumped up, that's basically 2985% skill damage. As for her skill builds, I would recommend to go an equal level for all 3 abilities because her skill does burst damage, while her normal attacks and her burst does sustain DPS. Okay, so going into her Ascension talents, Pounding Surprise basically gives you a 50% chance on hit from her normal attacks or her skill to make her next charge attack cost 0 stamina and do 50% extra damage. In combat, you can see this little floating flower around her, and this is basically the indicator for this effect. This effect has an internal cooldown of 4 seconds, and this 4 seconds cooldown starts from the initial proc, which is basically when you get this flower indicator, and not after you use her free charged attack. Her second Ascension talent gives 2 energy to everyone in your party when her charge attack crits, and from my testing, it doesn't proc multiple times. Also, I don't really know if there's an internal cooldown for this because it's really hard to see the effect of 2 energy, but my guess is that there shouldn't be an internal cooldown for this. Her Quality of Life talent basically lets you see all of the items that's unique to Mondstadt, which is honestly one of the best QOL talents for farming materials aside from Chi. Alright, so moving on to her weapon rankings, the best would be the Skyward Atlas, especially in single target situations. The Lost Prayer is the second best, but for AoE situations in the Spiral Abyss, it can outperform the Skyward Atlas. The problem with the Lost Prayer is that it also has a condition of ramping up, and even with max stacks, it isn't better than the Skyward Atlas for single target fights. Honestly, there isn't much difference between the two in damage, and for single target, the damage difference between the two weapons is only like 5%. And for AoE, it's too difficult to calculate because there are too many factors to consider, especially since her skills don't exactly hit in a big AoE like Diluc or Katsing. So one additional note for the Skyward Atlas is that it hits 6 times in that 15 seconds, and each hit can crit as well. Also, the Skyward Atlas effect will persist upon swapping characters, which is pretty neat, so you don't have to worry about, about it being gone when you swap characters. As for the Lost Prayer, you need to be active for 4 seconds to get 1 stack of the effect, and when you swap characters, the timer pauses instead of resetting, so that's a good thing. For example, if I stay on Klee for like 2 seconds, swap to another character, and then swap back to Klee, I only need to stay on Klee for 2 more seconds to get the stack, since it doesn't reset the timer. The third best weapon would be the Memory of Dust with its effect active, which is basically to keep a shield up for more damage. Even without its effect, it will outperform the Solar Pearl or Eye of Perception simply because of the raw stats that it has. The fourth in ranking would be either the Solar Pearl or the Eye of Perception, and they are pretty much very similar in damage. And if you don't have any of these, then craft the Mappa Mare from the blacksmith. Moving on to her best artifacts, the best combination would be the Crimson 2-piece and the Gladiator 2-piece. This is by far the most stat efficient way of building Klee, and the best part is that it has no conditions to meet or fulfill. Another good set will be the Lava Walker 4-piece, and honestly it's really good in certain situations, but it is a conditional artifact set. And it is technically better than the Crimson 2-piece and Gladiator 2-piece, but against enemies with innate elements or like slimes, it's practically useless. I was originally using the Lava Walker 4-piece set, but after using it for like a few weeks, I eventually decided to swap the Lava Walker out. And the reason for that is because I realized that I fight slimes or enemies with innate elements on a daily basis, and there were like countless times where my Lava Walker was absolutely useless. Even in the Spiral Abyss, floors 9 to 12 all have slimes at the start, like in the first stage, and Lava Walker just does nothing in those stages. Even the Fatui enemies have their own elements when their shields are active, so that just means that, you shouldn't be using the Lava Walker set against these enemies. With that said, if you want to push for like 3 stars on a certain stage, you can technically go for the Lava Walker, but I only counted 4 areas or like 4 stages where Lava Walker is effective from the Spiral Abyss 9 to 12. And when I say like stages, I actually mean like that certain half and not even the entire stage. So again, it is the best artifact if you meet its condition, but I'm just saying that it's not going to be often or on a daily basis, which is why I swapped it out. Alright, now I'll talk about the crazy artifact sets that I see being recommended, mostly on like Reddit or Discord. And the first artifact set that I want to talk about is the Crimson Witch 4-piece set on Klee. I literally see this everywhere, but I don't think people understand that you can't even reach the maximum stacks of the Crimson 4-piece effect with only 2 charges of her elemental skill on a 20-second cooldown. What's gonna happen is, first you will get 2 stacks of the Crimson 4-piece effect, which is effectively 15% pyro damage, aside from the 2-piece effect. Then it drops to 0% for the next 10 seconds. Okay, so think about it. A 4-piece artifact set giving you either 0% or 7.5% bonus pyro damage? Yeah, that's absolutely garbage. I've also seen some other people recommending the Wondrous Troop 4-piece, and I honestly don't even know where to begin on why it's absolutely terrible, so I'll just move on to the next section. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, which is her combos and all the practical stuff that I use personally on Klee. So when you play Klee, the idea here is to always use one auto attack before each charged attack. You don't have to use one auto before using her skill or burst, but the charged attack one is pretty important. So I will just call her first auto attack as autos from now. So her opener goes like this. You use her skill first, then you cancel it into her burst, followed by one auto and charged attack, followed by the second cast of your skill, and then lastly one more auto and one more charged attack. And the reason why it goes like this is because the internal cooldown of the free charged attack talent is like 4 seconds. So using her skill will get you 1 proc of the flower, the spark or whatever, and the burst has like a 2-second animation time, so you shave off this 4-second internal cooldown to get the most procs on your free charged attacks that do bonus damage. After you do this opener, you just want to spam her first auto into her charged attack and just repeat that. Or you can also do 2 autos into her charged attack if you need to save a bit of stamina. The opener for more burst damage would be to use your burst first, and then you just spam your skill until you run out of charges, and then just use her autos into her charged attacks. And another thing is that if you can precast your burst, you should always do it. One example is when you fight the Electro Hypostasis, and on his third attack, I think it's like the scissors or whatever, you can just cast her burst before he becomes vulnerable. Okay, so you might know that she has a lot of animation cancelling, but I will only be talking about the useful ones that I use personally without much drawbacks. First up is the skill cancel into burst, and basically as soon as the bomb appears, you can use her burst to cancel the skill's animation. Next is just a quick explanation of doing one auto into charged attack and repeat. So you just press your attack button twice and hold down on the second press, then you just spam the attack button until you see the animation of the first auto attack, then hold the button after. You also cannot be holding a directional button for this to work properly. Next is the auto attack into a jump, and this is mainly to reposition yourself, mostly used to get closer to enemies. The safer way to execute this is to watch for her backswing of her arm, then just jump afterwards. Delay it if you must, because a delayed attack is still better than no attack. And lastly, you have the auto attack into her skill, and this is mainly used in the opening before you use her skill into her burst, and so doing this gives you a 50% chance to proc the spark effect earlier. Alright, so for the last part of this video, I'll just go into her Constellations very quickly. Her C1 is really good, it's basically free extra damage as a passive. I'm not sure if it has an internal cooldown or not, but I can't test it either because I don't have any Constellations on Klee. Her C2 starts to pivot towards a support Klee being a viable option, but it's not quite yet. C2 Klees get a huge damage increase and you just want to line this up together with her burst. Her third constellation increases her skills level by 3 and her C4 is just insane, but if you swap during the 5th barrage of her burst, which is like the last 2 seconds, then it doesn't work at all. This basically makes support Klee a viable option together with boosting her efficiency as a secondary DPS if needed. C5 increases her burst level by 3 and her C6 increases your party's pyro damage by 10% for 25 seconds. And she also becomes a mini battery for other characters, giving a total of 9 energy each for your 3 other characters, which is a total of 27 energy. Okay, I think I covered pretty much everything, so that's it for this guide, and if you find yourself watching these videos, do hit the like and subscribe to support the channel. So thanks for your support, and let me know in the comments which character do you want to see next, or like whatever guides you think is useful for the rest.